Welcome into this episode of the How to Ride a Roller Coaster podcast. I'm David Ezell, and today I'm joined by Meg McCabe. She's the founder and CEO of Recovery Collective and also podcast host at the Full and Thriving Podcast. How's it going?
Oh, I'm doing fabulous now that I get to talk to you today, David.
Everything's just getting better and better.
Absolutely. I can't wait to chat with you today. Thank you for having me on the show.
You got it. Absolutely. And thank you for your time. And just keeping up with you for just a little while. I love all of the stuff that you're doing, especially with your podcast, especially with your private practice. So before we dive into both of those, where did the entrepreneurship thing come from? Is that something that you've kind of been like ingrained with and grown up in the family, or is it just kind of happened by whim?
It completely happened by whim. I grew up in a family that actually, it's so interesting. So my mom's always just had a 9 to 5, and my dad attempted to have a business when he was young, and it epically did not go well. So I think they buried it under the rug and discouraged all entrepreneurial endeavors. Really.
Put a big old Band-Aid over that. We don't even want to talk about it.
Yeah, and I don't really know the details of that, but it just, from my little kid perspective, it was like, oh, that was not a good idea. Maybe I should get a 9 to 5 job. So I really just grew up thinking I was going to get a bachelor's degree and get a job, and that was going to be as simple as that. And it wasn't until I was early 20s where I was, this feels so unrelated, but it all links together. I was dating someone who was a musician, and I was very envious of being able to make your own schedule, being able to live from a place of passion, being able to be creative. And I was like, well, crap, I don't have any musical talent.
I feel like musicians are like the first entrepreneurs ever before entrepreneurship was a thing. I feel like they could play where they wanted. They loved what they were doing. Some days were better than others, but you could make your own schedule. All of the stuff that you just said. And I feel like they were probably the first ones.
Right. I was just so inspired. I was like, I'm attracted to this person because of the life they've created. And I don't have any musical talent. So how do I get this life? Like, I was really perplexed. And then I started thinking, okay, maybe I could do some sort of business. Like, it was so foreign to me. It was a completely foreign idea. I was about to fall asleep, and it just dawned on me that people can create their own businesses. And then I thought about life coaching out of the blue. It must have been something that really had been on my mind for a few years in the back somewhere in the files.
Hanging out back there.
Interesting. So I quickly dove into, and this was mistake number 1, a life coach training that was mostly a cult, I would say. Like it did not. I had a great time. I learned a lot. Like, it was about neuro-linguistic programming, which is a really useful tool for coaches. But life coaching was very vague, and it was too expansive, and I didn't have an audience really. So after a few years of trying to do life coaching, I decided to niche down into helping people with eating disorders and recovering and, supporting people with their mental health, which is all derived from my previous history with an eating disorder. So I found that niche eventually.
Yeah, you know what? I feel like a lot of times the niche part is really what kind of eludes entrepreneurs, especially at the beginning, because, you kind of have that Walmart feeling. It's like, oh, well, I could sell to them, or I could sell to them, or they could be my customer. And it's hard sometimes to just kind of take what you want to do and take who you want to do it for and really distill that down to one customer base or one segment base. Because, you always feel like maybe you're missing out because I'm not offering it to these people. Am I missing out? But, like you just mentioned, the more that you can kind of niche down, the more you can really focus in on that customer.
Yeah, like there's this scarcity thing that when you niche down, you're like, oh my gosh, but then I could miss out on actually working with anybody. Like, at that point when you're new, you want to work with literally anybody.
Anyone who will pick up the phone, yes.
Right. So I think it took a little confidence, but I kept going back to that recovery story. So my own story of resilience, recovering from an eating disorder, I would create coaching events, life coaching events, and lean on that story and talk about it to derive like lessons from that experience to teach other people. And that was the thing that everyone would come up to me and talk about after the event.
Wow.
It was more the story that was resonating. So that's what gave me the confidence to say, you know, maybe I can help people more specifically in this way.
So did you really, once you kind of leaned in, I guess, more to like the story and the foundational aspects of you, is that where you started to kind of see that shift and you were like, where everything just kind of started to make a little bit more sense and just kind of opened up more?
Yeah, it all started to make more sense. I felt like even though I had niched down, the world expanded because suddenly I had more area of expertise. Like when you're an aspiring life coach, which respect to all the life coaches, I know there are different like realms of life coaching people can take, but you know, when you're 25 and someone calls you for life coaching and they need financial coaching, you're like, oh wait, this is not what I do.
Right.
You know? It was really vague for me. So I found once I was able to get certified as an eating disorder recovery coach, I got the proper certification. I had that expertise, and then you just dive deeper and deeper into that content and get better and better at serving that audience. So that's really what I discovered over the years, which is where I am now, you know.
And so that helps you really jump into Recovery Collective. Is that right? Or was it more of like the private practice and then Recovery Collective became bigger and it offered more outlets, or what was that like?
So it was more looking to solve a problem in the eating disorder space, right? I know everyone in their fields might see problems they want to solve. And so I found, especially during the pandemic, people were isolated and they were alone. And when people are alone and struggling with a mental health issue, it escalates. It gets 10 times worse. So that's why I found this need to develop a recovery community, which is actually a low-cost form of support, which is another problem in the eating disorder recovery space, which is traditional treatment modalities are very expensive, especially piecemealing some sort of outpatient program for yourself.
Yeah.
So I just found this community model was unique and new and affordable, and it gave everyone that sense of connection that was missing during the pandemic.
So what did the pandemic do? Like, and kind of tell me about a little bit of your mindset. So say, roll the calendar back to like March 2020, you know, so you're in, but now all of this happens. So how did you kind of, what were you thinking then? How did you kind of navigate that first little while?
Yeah, so that was a really interesting time for me because I was working a full-time job like many other entrepreneurs. I was working as a marketer for a mental health agency out in Colorado, and I loved that job. I had already tried to be a full-time entrepreneur at that point and had epically failed and decided to get another full-time job. So if people want to talk about, you know, the ups and downs and the roller coasters of being an entrepreneur, talk about sucking up your pride and getting another full-time job. Yeah. So I was back in my second round of having a full-time job and working on building up coaching on the side. And things were going pretty well. I had started working with influencers, and this was like probably the beginning of the height of influencer marketing.
Yeah.
Which was exciting. It was before influencers charge as much as they do too.
Yeah, I didn't feel like they really knew what it was. I didn't feel like businesses really knew how to take advantage of it. But it does feel like maybe that first wave of COVID, but kind of became that influencer kind of jumping off point.
Right, because of TikTok and everyone was on their phones even more. But I had kind of connected with a business coach, so I had hired a business coach at that time who really was leaning into the influencer marketing component of things. So I just started connecting with these influencers who were on YouTube wanting to talk about their eating disorder recovery stories.
Awesome.
And so many people were messaging them wanting help. But those individuals, those YouTubers aren't professionals. So I just created a referral base with many of these YouTubers, which helped because during COVID, everyone's turning to YouTube asking, how do I heal my eating disorder? How do I do this? Yeah. So that really helped. But back to me working my second full-time job. I was just balancing them kind of happily. Like, I enjoyed having the stability of this job. I enjoyed the clients that I did have part-time. But then June 2020, this company I was working for insisted that we all go back into the office.
Wow, that's soon. June 2020.
It was very soon. And wow. I was in the business side of things. I think it was because they were therapists seeing clients, but they wanted it to be fair. So they had everyone come back June 2020, and masks were optional. I kid you not. They would never say this publicly, but it was very clear that masks were optional, and you'd kind of get, I kind of got shamed for wearing a mask once in a while. I felt embarrassed because masks were kind of new. So I didn't like the way the company handled COVID.
Kind of very nonchalant. I was in kind of a similar area with that as well. Like when you would have to kind of go back to the office and COVID was still very much a thing. You know, we were still kind of in that first round of like the Pfizer Moderna shots, but you had to get on the wait list and you couldn't just go get it at Walgreens that day. You had to get on the wait list for it. And I still remember, it was kind of that weird thing where if you had one on, it was just, people kind of give you a little bit of a look and whatnot. So yes, super, super weird time.
Yeah, it was a weird time. And I just it was a stressful environment. There were women crying in the bathroom because they had like some sort of underlying illness that increased their risk. It was just a stressful moment. So it really motivated me to just really lean back into becoming an entrepreneur and getting this off the ground. Awesome. So by October 2020, I finally was able to go full time again. So, with the increase of mental health issues, which is very unfortunate, that correlated with COVID, it did help my business because I work in mental health. So that kind of helped. And then my motivation to leave an unhealthy environment during the pandemic was also part of it.
Wow. And then so it just kind of grew from there. And again, like we said at the beginning, you have a podcast now that is just growing by leaps and bounds. So is that kind of when that started to tie in as well, just to kind of help amplify the story, or did that come later?
Yeah, so the podcast started June 2020.
Okay.
Yeah, so I started going all in once I was working from home during lockdown for a short period of time. I started the podcast, and I have to tell you, I have huge faith in podcasts. I am an avid podcast listener. Yeah. I feel like I have an online marketing PhD, even though I have nothing near that. I've just listened to the equivalent of podcasts.
Right. 4 years worth.
Yeah. I am just right there on the edge of the online marketing world.
Make your own certificate and hang it up.
Yeah. I'm like, is there a test you can test out of this? And just say you have the degree because you listen to all the podcasts, but I'm a huge proponent of podcasts. Awesome. I had also started working with those influencers, and I really realized the value of really regularly producing content and building trust as that content creator. So YouTube is a fabulous form of building trust because it's audio and visual. Yeah. I was not quite feeling the visual component at that time. So I decided to just stick to the podcast. And I also have this inner critic that makes it really hard for me to want to publish anything sometimes. So I actually hired an editor. I recorded my first few episodes in a bathroom because I thought the acoustics would be better. Nice. I had no fancy setup. I didn't even listen to those first few episodes. I sent them off to an editor, trusted the editor, and just
Just
posted
hit
them
post.
blindly. I was like, screw it. They say aim for B minus work, and this is like maybe B minus C work, and let's just do it. And because otherwise it wouldn't have happened.
Right.
It literally wouldn't have happened. So I posted maybe 3 or 4 episodes, and I was getting feedback. Like people were messaging me on Instagram, these long paragraphs like, "Oh, I found your
Wow.
podcast and I have questions about this," or "I loved this part." And so I recognized then and there, okay, people are listening, this is helping.
Yeah.
And the influencers that I guess the word influencer is the right word because they had big audiences. I had them on as guests.
Right.
And so then they were able to share
With their
the
network.
podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, with their network, and it just kind of built from there.
Yeah, and I think you hit right on it. Even now, listening back to my first couple of episodes, I mean, it takes up just about all I can stomach just to kind of get through them, just because of that same thing, because we're our own biggest critic to ourselves. But I love how you said that. It's like, look, I'm gonna shoot for what I want to do, and it's not going to be perfect, but it doesn't matter. The goal is to get it out there and to engage with the people that I want to engage with. You can always make it better. You can always get a better microphone or go to a place that has better acoustics. You can always do all of those things. So I think that's where a lot of times entrepreneurs kind of get stuck, is that lizard brain starts to take over, and it's like, oh, well, what if people don't like it? What if nobody listens? What if it's out there for 30 minutes and you don't have a single like? Do I go rush to take it down? It's all of that is real stuff. Or should I pursue this and tell my family about it, or will they tell me go do something else? So I think it's a lot to handle. So I think you put it really well. You just have to get to that B minus work, put it out there. You can make that B minus better as you go.
Yep, I highly suggest anyone to do that. Sometimes you just have to settle for what it is.
Yeah.
And what I find is that I will produce an episode. I kid you not. I have over 100 episodes now, so I have plenty of experience in this. I will publish an episode that I think is amazing and it doesn't perform well. And then I will publish an episode that I feel was spastic, all over the place, not interesting, like I'm stumbly. And then everyone's listening to it and they're sharing it and they're commenting and sharing it on social media. So it really depends. Like you could think you're putting out something really intolerable or uninteresting. Yeah. And it will resonate with people. And totally. Sometimes I find even the most basic information helps another person. If they're maybe they're on the same journey as you, but they're a few years behind, you sharing that basic information is also really helpful. So I recognize that I don't need to be having these episodes that are super deep in the weeds, like most newest conversations about eating disorders, the leading edge of treatment all the time. Sometimes it's basic on here are some tips on how to get better or feel more confident in your body. And it's for the people who are digesting the basics still.
Yeah, I think that's right on. I think most of the time we feel like anything that we have to say, especially if we're creating content or any of that kind of thing, that it has to be so uniquely original to us. Like I can't say something that maybe just innately now as an entrepreneur, as a content creator, podcaster, somebody that owns their own business. If you say those things that are just innately entrepreneurship 101, nobody's going to take me seriously because everybody says that. But like you said, that's not true. There's everybody in every stage of this whole journey. And some people may still be in well, what if people don't like my idea? What if people don't listen to me? And now you're talking to that person, and that one person that's all you need.
Exactly. And that's a really helpful point. I'm so glad you're kind of bringing this up and shedding light onto it. It's that, the same. So for instance, one topic that's very popular in the life coaching space, manifestation, right? Everyone talks about it. Everyone has their own manifestation hacks. There are thousands of teachers who teach manifestation. You might listen to 50 different podcast episodes on this subject, but someone is going to make it click for you more than the other person.
Yeah.
Right? It's like it doesn't matter necessarily what the message is all the time. It's who's delivering it and how they deliver it and the content they use to illustrate that.
Right.
So again, if you're speaking on a topic that you don't think is necessarily original, that's okay, because some people might need to hear it from you.
That's good. That's good. People do need to hear it from you, because I think like you alluded to a few minutes ago, being your authentic self, the way that you bring that content isn't going to be like anybody else. Even if you do talk about manifestation, even if you do have an episode completely dedicated to that, the way that you think about it, the way that you interpret it and explain it and go through it is going to be completely different than somebody else. And you've already built that trust equity through the 100+ episodes of your podcast, through people engaging with you. So it's also going to have something different as opposed to somebody hearing maybe something similar from somebody that they don't know. If they hear it from you, it's, you've kind of narrowed that distance gap a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like the same thing when your mom tells you something 100 times and you're like, what? And then when you're a full-grown adult, your best friend says it to you and you're like, that's a brilliant idea.
Yep. And your mom's like, wait a minute. No. I've been saying that for 12 years. No.
Yeah. Like, you might be the source that people need to hear it from.
For sure.
And that's the important message here.
So if there's anybody out there that maybe does have a podcast or they're thinking about starting one, what are some tips or, things, mindset type things that they could take away as far as just how to grow it? How should they think when it comes to like delivering their own form of content?
Oh, this is interesting. Such a good question. I don't know where to take it because there are many directions I could take it. But I think really one thing that I take pride in is doing the interview prep to the point where that person knows that I've done my homework.
Yeah.
I know who they are. I have thought through intelligent questions I'm going to ask them. And that brings a higher quality episode. So content does matter. And I think that changed everything for me because I started being really intentional about the guests I invite on the show. So looking for those credible guests, it might not necessarily mean they have huge audiences, but they have an important voice in the space. And then making sure I give the best interview I can give in that moment. And I wasn't always like that. When I first started, I would slap together interview questions on the fly. And now I think one change there was just the intentionality around the interview brings so much more confidence into the conversation. I didn't realize how much that could just transform my own experience as the host.
For sure.
To make sure I really, really do my homework. And I think maybe this is not everybody. I think most people do their homework. But for me, I was, like I said, the C student. And then I started becoming an A+ interviewer. And that helped a lot.
Well, and I think you're right on with that, because the more that you can come to that interview prepared, and like you said, more in-depth things about the person, it's also going to help that person come into that interview at the same level. Because if you bring that level, they're not going to want to come in at a C or half that. They're going to say, okay, well, this is a professional production. I need to match where they are.
Absolutely. Yeah. You bring the energy of like, I've done my homework. I've read your books. I've read books because I have guests coming on the show. Like Oprah does that. So I'm going to do that too, and that's the level of preparedness I like to bring. And then, I hear the guests say, that was a question I've never been asked before, or you're a great interviewer. Wow, this made me think differently, or I learned something from this conversation too. And
so good.
That's the rewarding experience I get. So that would be one tip that I'd tell myself just starting, because I didn't do that.
That's so good. So what did you do to help yourself become an even better interviewer? Like after those first few times, as you're trying to kind of grow doing that, how did you become, just a better interviewer?
Well, so the preparing made me feel comfortable. Like I felt like I could relax because I knew what I was going to talk about. And I would prepare some loose questions in advance just to make
Okay.
sure that if the conversation wasn't flowing, I'd be able to pull it back into the topic that I knew the audience wanted to listen to. And
Mm.
I think that's another point right there is when you start to get to know your audience, you're in their head. You know what they're thinking. You know what questions they would ask if they were sitting in front of that guest.
Yeah.
So really leaning into, okay, who are your current clients and what would they want to ask this guest? Like what are they dying to know? And I think that helps my interview skills too, because
That's good.
I'm not thinking just about what I'm curious about. I'm asking questions for my clients. Like it's literally getting from their perspective most of the time.
Right.
And I think that's another form of feedback I get from people is, are you in my head? Like I feel like sometimes you are.
You're like, yes, I am. Look at the certification hanging on the wall back here. PhD in digital marketing. I am in your
Yeah,
head.
yeah, exactly. That's another point is just know your audience, but really know what questions they want to ask. Like I could dive in and ask all these questions that I'm really fascinated about, which helps.
Yeah,
But the audience and their perspective is really important.
that's it. I love how you said that. That's so great. So,
Mm.
as we're wrapping up, make sure to tell people how they can follow you, how they can keep up with you, all of that good stuff.
Well, first of all, this has been amazing and it went by
Heck yeah.
so fast.
I know,
Uh,
right?
so thank you for having me.
You got it.
Everyone can find me at meg-mccabe.com and they can find the Recovery Collective, which is an online eating disorder recovery community at recoverycollective.mykajabi.com. So it
Okay.
is on the Kajabi platform. And then also find me on Instagram. I think that's probably the best place to get the latest updates from me. So that's just at Meg_McCabe.
Perfect. And I will make sure to link all of that in the show notes so that people can find you, keep up with you, and check out just all the amazing things you're doing. Well, it was such a pleasure to have you on tonight. Thank you again.
Oh, thank you, David. This was so much fun. I don't get asked a lot about entrepreneurial stuff. So this
So
was
fun.
refreshing and inspiring. It's a huge passion of mine I don't get to talk about enough. So it was a big treat for me and it's been an honor. So thank you.
You got it. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like the video and comment. I love to interact. And as always, be sure to subscribe to the channel.